These are real 911 calls, disturbing, mysterious, and true. Each story will send chills down your spine and slowly drift you into sleep. This story is completely free. We don't put any ads, which means we don't earn anything from these videos. All we ask is one small favor. Please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. It's free for you, but it gives us the motivation to keep making more real police stories every night. Also, tell us in the comments which city are you watching from and what time is it right now. We love reading your messages. Now, let's begin the story. Story number 1. I was a deputy on the midnight shift when the call came in January. A clean, cold night where your breath looks like fog in your own car. I remember the time because dispatch repeated it twice. 1, 3, Unit 12, 911 open line, partial whisper, then disconnect. Mapping to 15503 County Road 4, cross of Old Quarry. Caller unknown, number returns to residence. You clear to respond? Unit 12 en route, I said, flicking on my overheads just low enough to wake up the road. It's 20 minutes from the highway into that part of the county. No streetlights, just fences and fields that go flat and silver under a moon like we had that night. The MDT showed the little blue dot of me crawling toward a red ringed circle that never looks big until you're alone out there. 2 minutes later, dispatch again. Unit 12, be advised, we received a second call. Same number. Female voice whispering, "Are you there?" And then the line went quiet. Your backup is 10 minutes behind. Unit 8. I'll keep the line open if it returns. Copy. One hand on the wheel, the other on the radio mic, and a feeling in my jaw like a slow clench. Welfare checks on hang-ups are usually appliances sitting on buttons or kids playing with phones. But when it's a whisper that asks a question, your body acts like it already knows the answer might be bad. I kept my speed even. The frost along the ditches made everything look soft. I turned onto County Road 4. The Murdoch place sat a quarter-mile down, a farmhouse that used to be crop loud and bright when I was growing up, and now just sat with its windows like shut eyes. The bank had taken it in the fall. We'd been there a few times to move along folks who tried to squat. No power, no water, and no reason a phone line should be live. That thought was a little too late. I kept it to myself. Dispatch, 12's on scene, I said, and anchored my tires near the mailbox so my lights could paint the front. The house didn't shrug under them. It didn't do anything at all. The wind chime on the porch didn't bother to move even a little. My breath snuck out under my scarf, and my boot soles sounded loud as I hit the gravel. I felt the radio mic against my chest and held the other end close to my shoulder where it belongs. Copy? I asked. Copy 12, dispatch said. Still no recontact. I watched the house for a moment longer. The front door had a plywood panel where the glass used to be, and a council sticker noting condemnation. We'd tacked it ourselves 2 months back. When I tried the knob, it turned with that dry resistance of a door that hasn't moved in too long and then gave with a sigh. Sheriff's office, I said, voice steady because that's what has to lead. If anyone called for help, identify yourself. We're coming in. Exigent circumstances covered the trespass. The law doesn't wait when a call might be life or death. I stepped into cold that was somehow colder than outside. That precise kind of room temperature that means there hasn't been a body in that space in a while. My light tapped the walls and turned them back into walls again. There was dust, but not the thick kind. The kind that knows your boots right away and tells on you for every move you make. Furniture draped in sheets, a rolled rug half sunken into itself. The place felt stopped. Somewhere above me, a sound that didn't belong answered my call. It was a ring. Not the distant rise and fall of a house phone in a movie, not the bright digital chirp of a cell. It was the old bell ring, the kind you feel in your teeth. Short, short, short. Stop. Then again, as if someone had set it to the old cadence we used to drill so kids would know to run to it. I stood under the stairwell and listened to it come from the second floor, left side. Dispatch, I said, careful to keep my voice level. I'm hearing a telephone ring upstairs. Can you confirm that number is still calling in? Static that sounds like snow on a TV and then 12, stand by. We still show the original number on the board, but the line's not actively ringing in. Do you have a handset on scene? Affirm. I let that be enough, because I didn't really have one, not plugged in. I started up the stairs, which complained like stairs right before they decide whether or not they can still be stairs. Sheriff's office. I called again, slow and clear. If anyone's inside, call out. At the top was a little hallway with 3 doors. The ring came from the left, a room with blue wallpaper marked with pencil lines where some parent had measured heights and dates. Names I knew and names I didn't. My flashlight found the phone on a small table by the window, a rotary that should have been in a museum or a diner trying too hard. Its cord ran down the wall and across the baseboard and then into nothing. No plate, no jack, just an end frayed, as if someone had pulled it out and let it sit. The ringer kept going, soft and patient, like a knock from a hand that doesn't mind if you answer. I stood very still and listened to nothing else, no breath, no shift that would tell me I wasn't alone. Dispatch, I said again. I have a handset here that appears disconnected, but I am hearing it ring. Confirm your line status. Standby, 12. And then, in a way that made my scalp prickle, my own voice came over my shoulder mic a second later, tinny and delayed. Dispatch, 12's on scene. I looked down at the radio, at the channel display, at the way it never glows this wrong shade of green. We're getting a bleed over on our end, dispatch said, voice in my ear and far away at the same time. We're patching tech. Hold position. Copy. The ring stopped. The silence felt glad about it. I reached a hand toward the phone and didn't touch it. The table had dust on it, but there were 2 little half circles angling through it, as if someone had picked up the handset and set it down a few times recently. Maybe squatters. Maybe curious teenagers. But the window was locked from inside, and there were no prints on the glass. My backup called 10 out, voice bright with the cadence of a man who thinks this will end with a closed report and coffee. 8, watch your step, I said, before I could stop the words. My voice was a kind of warmth I offered both of us. Then the phone rang again, and my radio answered. Not me. The same words, staggered and thinner. Sheriff's office. If anyone called for help, identify yourself. Hearing your own words, come back to you, with just enough difference to sound like someone else, is not a feeling you can practice. I breathed through it and put my hand on the handset. It was cold. Of course it was cold. You do it by the book. Dispatch, I said. I'm going to pick up the handset. Copy, they said, and their voice felt closer now. Go ahead. I lifted it, the little weight of it, some human thing I could hold. It made no sound, no hiss of a line, just the hollow of an object. When I said, hello, the room took it the way old rooms take everything. They put it somewhere and keep it. Down the stairwell, the front door creaked as if someone had just met the cold again. I didn't turn away. Is someone inside? I asked the deadline in my hand, because habit is a powerful thing. My radio answered in my own voice. Is someone inside? Then dispatch, a little flurry of keys, and then 12. I'm hearing a loopback on the 911 recording. There's a tape of your initial arrival feeding into the line call. I'm getting tech to check a patch. Copy, I said. Because copy is a word that feels like control. Footsteps on the gravel outside. Relief enough to make my knees remember what soft feels like. 8? I called, projecting. Yeah, it's me, he called back. He tried the front door and walked in careful, because we're all careful when we step into a story we don't know yet. He met me at the foot of the stairs with his eyebrow up and 14 different jokes stacked behind his teeth. Got a light show in here, he said quietly, nodding at the radio on my chest. Dispatch says we're haunting ourselves. We cleared the rest of the upstairs together. Closets, bathroom with a mirror you look in only for as long as you have to, a little room at the back where the wallpaper changed to a pattern of moons and satellite shapes I recognized from some kid's bedding set. The quiet felt like company. I don't mean that in a way you need to make a story out of, just a sense that the house noticed us. We didn't find anyone. Downstairs, we checked the kitchen for footprints, and the back door for pried wood. The back door was locked with a hasp we'd put on, still sealed, little cobweb thread unbroken in the corner. Dispatch, I said. We're clear in the house. Secured doors still secured. Can you confirm telco status for that number? Pause. Keyboard. The usually cheerful voice on the other end dropped a half step. 12. The listed carrier shows that number as disconnected since November. There shouldn't be service. They're rolling a line tech, but that'll be hours. Copy, I said again. The old phone upstairs sat very still and said nothing about it. Aid and I looked at each other in a way that says we both wish for something ordinary to point at. He walked the perimeter, and his boot prints made their own new thing in the frost. Mine did too. No one else's did. While he was outside, the phone rang a third time. I felt it in my shoulder like I'd swallowed ice. I went up the stairs faster than I wanted to, because sometimes you move as if speed can change the answer, and if it can't, at least speed is something you can pick. It rang right until I got to it, and then it stopped, as if it had been waiting on me specifically. I stood in the doorway and listened to the static in my radio grow a little rougher. This time it wasn't my voice that returned. It was dispatches, threaded thin. Unit 12 en route. Then my own. Copy. In sequence. Exactly as it had gone the first time. A record, played back into the air we were breathing. Dispatch, I said, are you playing me the initial traffic? It felt dumb to ask, but you always let them know what you're hearing, because if you don't, it becomes only yours to hold. No, 12, they said gently. Sure they knew how this would sound. We're not playing audio. We can hear it too. We handled it like professionals. We finished the search. We wrote the notes. 8 ran the parcel number for contact on the bank's property manager, who didn't pick up at 1. 40 inches the morning because, why would he? And we left him an instruction to meet us at first light with a key to the outbuilding we couldn't breach. We put a little tape on the side door in a fold I could read later. We marked the house in the CAD as cleared. When we closed the front door, the wind chime on the porch shifted and gave one mild note, like a laugh that someone coughed into. In the car, I warmed my hands over the vent, and the radio settled back into its normal patterns. A traffic stop on the north side. A deer strike near mile marker 90, the tired joy of a night dispatcher counting their hours. My body said it was done, but a part of my mind watched the rear view as if the house might climb into the road behind me. I told myself it was the hour and the cold, and the fact that empty places sound like voices when you're looking for one. I got 3 miles down the road when dispatch came back. 12, just so you're aware, we're still getting a hot line on that number. No audio now, just open line. The call timer is stuck at 1 minute and 3 seconds. Say again? I asked. I'd stopped at a cattle guard to let a ranch dog decide whether or not to run out into the road, and the sound of the cattle guard under my tires made a little song of metal that sounded weirdly like a dial tone. 1 minute and 103, dispatch said, and we both heard ourselves hearing it. We submitted the report. The telco came later that morning and shook their heads in a practiced way that doesn't make anyone feel better. No active service, no dial tone at the drop. They ran their own lines and found nothing to fault. Maybe a neighbor's cordless was somehow hitting the old metal. Maybe a prank. Maybe a glitch. In a system built on older systems that remember the shape of things. 2 nights later, at 1:03 on the dot, we got another 911 hang-up from that address. No whisper this time. No ring in the house when we checked. The same heavy quiet, the same snow of dust unmarked except by us. We changed the locks on the back door. We taped the front again. We wrote it up as, unable to locate caller, anomaly with disconnected line, property secured. That's the phrase you use when you've run out of things you can name. They bulldozed the farmhouse in March. I parked on the county road one more time and watched the excavator do what a winter of wind had not. Dry boards went to splinters, and memories became a pile of lumber. We kept the call history, because you keep everything. A month after the ground was flat and the bank had a sign posted, future home, of something they got one more 911 call mapped to that same patch of dirt. Open line. Call timer. 1-3. No voice. When people ask me about the scariest call I've had, I don't talk about the nights with sirens or the scenes we go to and then try not to bring home. I think about a telephone that rang in a house with no line and a whisper that asked if I was there. I was. I still am. Story number 2. I was on nights in the West Midlands when Control pinged us with a grade 1 silent 999, caller pressed 55. If you're not from here, that's our silent solution. If you can't speak, you press 55, and the call handler routes it to police. It isn't a prank flag. It's the sort of button people hit when the last thing they've got left is a choice. We were 2 up that night, me driving. 2:19. The city ironed flat and shiny by drizzle that kept threatening to turn to fog. Control said the call mapped to Renford House, a 1,960 seconds tower off a ring road, the sort of block that's been in our CAD more times than it's been in the news. Except Renford had been empty for months, cladding stripped, scaffolding up, power isolated. Security guards on site to keep copper ferries and urban explorers out. Oscar 2. 1. Control said in my ear, calm but clipped. Silent 999 from a mobile. Call handler reports. 5-5 acknowledged. Cell location radius 30 meters around Renford House, Winchfield Street. Open line, faint background. Your closest. Request you attend. Site security reports no one inside. BTP not required at this time. Routine OBS. 2. 1. Show us en route, I said. My partner checked the CAD on the MDT, scrolling through the previous logs. Trespass. Noise reports when they started stripping the facades. A couple of old call-outs when the lifts used to jam with kids messing about. Nothing recently. He made that face he always made when a simple job looked like it might try not to be. We turned off the main road, tires hissing on wet tarmac, and took the little feeder down toward the estate. The tower stood up out of its own reflection in the puddles, blank windows, and a drape of white shrink wrap catching the light like a ghost trying to keep warm. The scaffolding had its own language rattles, a low hum when the wind moved through it. Down at ground level, a porta-cabin with a weak fluorescent sat under a yellow cone of existence. The security hut. Raj, the night guard, met us with his lanyard and a mug of something that steamed more than it smelled. He's one of those men who's been knights for so long, his internal clock refuses to learn anything else. Evening, officers, he said automatically, and then corrected himself with a smile. Morning. You want to sign in? Got a silent 999 mapping here, I told him, and he put the mug down, serious now. We signed the sheet, watched him fish out the master keys, a jangling beast of brass and fob. No one should be inside, he said. Electric's dead, lifts locked out. Only entry is the front. And I lock that when I walk the perimeter. No broken seals on my rounds. When did you last go in? My partner asked. Top of the hour. Every hour. He shrugged toward the tower. Place talks, you know, even with no power. The wrap tents. Relax. You hear a telly sometimes, and then nothing. And that's just the wind making fools of us. Behind the hut, the pedestrian gate squealed like it had been waiting to perform for someone. Even after you do this job long enough to stop pretending you don't get superstitions, you still go through at a normal pace. The front of Renford concrete steps to double doors covered in plywood, built to show you one singular fact. Nobody lives here. There was a metal door chopped into the ply with a barrel lock. Raj handed me a key. Mind the first landing, he said. There's a wet patch where the rain tracked. I put a cone down. Control, I radioed. 2. 1 on scene at Renford. Meeting site security. Gaining entry. Keep the line. If it recontacts. Copy. 2. 1. For situational awareness, call duration so far 92 seconds. Background noise described as a faint chirp at regular intervals. Handler confirms 55 acknowledged at 2 hours 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Chirps. Smoke alarms starved of batteries do that little single beep that can unglue your sanity. It's supposed to keep you safe, but in a block you could populate with ghosts out of old tenancy agreements, it's a heartbeat you can't locate. We stepped inside. The air had that closed building cold, not fresh, not moving. The cone on the first landing was where Raj said, a tiny lighthouse in a sea of gray stairwell. I called out, police! If you called for help, shout or knock, we're coming up. My voice came back to me from concrete and steel, and nothing else. We took the stairs. The lights were out as promised. Our torches took over in slices. Each landing had the old stenciled numbers, paint bubbled and chipped. 1, 2, 3. The flats had been stripped of doors, just rectangles of dark with sheeted frames beyond. Every now and then the wind found the wrap, and the whole place sent a low shiver through itself. At 4 we stopped. The chirp was clearer. One of those smoke alarms, but it's amazing. Put it in a maze of flats and corridors and the sound slips sideways on you. Control, I said, low, because it felt like the sort of noise you don't shout over. We have a single beep alarm audible inside. We're clearing. Control copies, said the voice in my ear. Be advised the line is still open. No voice. Handler attempted tap, no response. Tap. The call handler will sometimes ask the caller to tap the phone once for yes, twice for no. It's a method that has saved people. When it doesn't work, you make the same choices, but more carefully. We worked the fourth's corridor. Torch cones grazing walls. You could see the outlines of lives that had already left. Where a picture had shielded paint. A rectangle clean as memory. The flattening in the carpet where a sofa used to be. But no people. Windows were sealed. No footprints in the film of dust beyond ours. The chirp did that trick where you turn, and it seems to have moved just out of reach again. At the seventh, I felt my radio give a little scratch, like it had caught the hem of someone's whisper. 2, 1, Control said. Call handler says they can hear male voices faint in background. Possibly yours. They report a lift chime as well. The lifts are isolated, I told them. We'll check the plant room. On 9, we both paused. It wasn't anything big. Just that sense you get that you've walked past the same poster twice. There was a residence notice board, the kind with cork that's mostly thumbtacks and old staples. A few curling papers still clung on Skip Arrives Saturday, Block Meeting 2's 7. The date on one was from last year, and I knew it was from last year because I'd been on the rota that night and had driven past a pile of mattresses high as a transit. On 10, the chirp stopped. We both noticed simultaneously, like two pedestrians who stop for the same traffic light. No one has asked them to obey. The silence had a shape again. Hello? My partner called out. Police. If you can hear us, bang on a wall. We stood still enough to make the air work. Knocks when they come, sometimes free you. These didn't. There were no knocks. Just a slow adjustment in the building, a lengthening creak as the wind teased the wrap on the east side and dragged a loose bit over an edge. Control came into my ear. Line has dropped, then reconnected. Duration 2 minutes now. Handler confirms second 55 received on reconnect. That's not done by mistake. You don't find a random open line and hit 55 by brushing it with your cheek. Twice. We kept climbing. We hit 12 with that morning tiredness where your legs are fine but your stomach's already made plans for breakfast later. The stairwell widened slightly, as if the building had been bodged around something. I forgot this until I saw it. There was a heavy metal door on the landing we didn't have at the lower floors. No number, painted municipal green, paint ferociously flaked. It had that sign older buildings sometimes have where regulations are written like polite threats. Authorized personal only, plant. There was also a marker pen scrawl above the hinge that said 13 with a box around it, a joke or a note or both. Plant room? My partner asked. Could be lifts, I said. Could be roof access. I tried the handle. Locked. Raj's key ring had a weight to it. When I selected the scariest key, which is to say the one that looked like it belonged on a portcullis and turned, the door accepted us like a theater curtain giving backstage its due. We stepped into that echoing industrial quiet. Pipes browned with age, a wall of boards with switches and dials that had once meant something to a caretaker who had keys to everything and a kettle tucked in a cupboard. Our torches ran left to right and back. In the middle of the room, a box bolted to the wall with a handset hung on a cradle. The box had a tired red LED wobbling to show willing. On the front, the maker's name, something like CareLink, one of those telecare systems blocks use for warden, call pull cords. Below it, a little screen. Alarm active. Duration, 0 hours, 2 minutes, and 19 seconds. Control, I said, suddenly aware of my own breath. We've got a warden call panel live on battery. Display shows an active call at 2 minutes 19. That's your timer? Affirm 2. 1. Handler reads 2:19 alive now, climbing. Can you see a line status? I leaned in. The handset cord gleamed like it had not been moved in months, still fixed at curl angles only time can make. But the cradle's hook switch sat low, depressed, like the handset wasn't quite home. I pressed it gently. The LED brightened, as if relieved, and then sank to its old wobble. The chirp, somewhere down the building, returned one single beep that made no argument, just a presence. The display clicked one more second, then froze. Alarm cleared. "Control," I said. "We've cleared a stuck hook on the warden panel. Timer just froze. You still got the line?" "-2, 1. The line's dropped clean. Good work. Handler is marking as resolved pending area search. Can you remain on scene and complete a full walkthrough? BT OpenReach can attend first light." We stood there with our torches on that little box for a few seconds longer than we had to. It's easy to invent meanings for coincidences. Easier still when the numbers line up. In my head, the timer on that display matched the call time Control had been giving me with a precision that shouldn't have meant anything more than, "We did a job." And yet the simple fact of a disconnected building making any call at all tugged. The plant room had more to show. We found the lift control panel, main isolators in the off position, tags from the contractors clipped through, dated and signed. We found a cabinet with a visitor log that had ended at the start of the cladding works. We found rows of pull cords coiled like snakes ready to be rehung when people came back. Nothing living. We closed the door and locked it up. We went back down and did a flat by flat on the 12th, then the 11th, the 10th where the chirp had been loudest, and now felt like the quietest place I had ever stood. In one living room, a scrap of wallpaper lifted with the breeze from a cracked pane and laid itself back down, the sound of a hand smoothing a sheet. We marked a little bit of tape where the back door to a communal balcony had a catch that almost closed but not quite. We wrote it into the CAD. At the 6th, my radio gave a second voice I've never quite explained. Not a ghost story voice, not a whisper. Just the automated 999 message we all know by heart, pressing itself thin into my earpiece like a song coming through a cab speaker from 2 cars back. "You are through to police. If you are unable to speak, press 55. It was there, and gone in the same breath. I looked at my partner. He looked at me. We both did that shrug that says, "We both heard it, and we will mention it on the log, and we will not make more of it." "Control," I said. "We just had a bleed of the automated handler message come through our channel. Can you check our air?" "Copy," Control said, and I could hear the background room behind the operator, keys, and someone's laugh caught and put away. "We've had intermittent feedback from your site. Likely interference. Our comms techs are aware." Back at the ground floor, Raj met us by the door like a man meeting weather forecasts personally. "Well?" he asked. "Panel upstairs was stuck," I said. "Your warden. Call. Looks like it seized a line and held it. We freed it. Line dropped. We'll put in a job for telecoms. You might hear the alarms beep until they finish bleeding out." I told them last week, he said. Half to us, and half to the list of names he'd already called about other things. "Battery back there. It sings sometimes. At night. Like it remembers." We stood with him a while outside. The drizzle had halved, and the air had that almost smell of snow that never quite commits in this city. The scaffolding breathed. We finished the checks you always finish: the basement doors, the garages, the bike cages, the little places where a person who doesn't want to be found might curl up that step beyond even the world we police. We cleared the scene. I drove out slow, wipers working for a mist that was barely there. "Funny that," my partner said without humor. "Pressing 55. Twice from a dead building. Maybe the caller wasn't in the building," I said, because we both knew we were going to have to write something like that anyway. Cell radius isn't GPS magic. It's a lattice of guesses. Maybe they were near the mast. Maybe the panel piggybacked a line it shouldn't have. Maybe the bleeding towers are playing telephone with themselves. "Maybe," he said, and watched his breath ghosts on the window as we turned back to the main road. "You'll want an ending." "We always do." We got OpenReach in, they took the panel away in a bag with stickers, promised a report that would have more words than answers and probably the phrase, "legacy infrastructure" in italics, without the italics. Control pushed an alert to the neighborhood team to do welfare checks on the handful of rough sleepers who sometimes use the arches across the way. No one said they were in danger. Nobody claimed the call. The number was Pig, no registered name, last top-up months back at a petrol station that serves everyone and no one. 2 nights later, Control pinged me while I was in a queue at a kebab shop, because nights will be nights. Oscar 2, 1, For awareness, we've had a second 999 silent with 55 same mast, radius about 50 meters this time, possibly the car park side. Open line for just over a minute, then dropped. Unit nearby checked, no persons found. Just letting you know. I told my partner while we waited for chips. He looked through the glass at the neon on the wet pavement and said, "Sometimes the city just coughs." We ate in the car with the heaters on, and the windows fogged, and wrote our report lines like we were building a fence we hoped would stand up to the morning. Months later, they started bringing tenants back in new cladding, new paint over old paint. Someone had been tasked to put a glass door where the plywood had been, and Renford House learned the sound of a lift again. Every now and then I still drive past it and see lights on and someone at a window making a phone call like it's the most ordinary thing in the world to speak to someone who isn't in the room with you. If I think about that night, I don't think about fear. I think about how many systems have to work, overlapping, for any of us to be found when we press a button. I think about a panel designed to keep people safe holding a line like it couldn't bear to let go. I think about that tiny screen with its numbers stepping forward in time with a stranger's call somewhere in the dark. And I think about the sound the building made when we shut the plant room door. Just a soft, sensible metal on metal, as measured as a breath taken and let out again. Story number 3. I work out of a small coastal detachment in British Columbia. Nights here carry their own kind of quiet. The kind that feels like a tide that comes all the way in and holds its breath. You hear different things. Halyards clicking against masts, a distant foghorn from a ferry that's not scheduled, and the slow slap of water under docks. You learn to walk like you're always one plank's width away from the ocean, because you often are. It was 2-7 when comms came through, voice low the way it gets when they're already monitoring a line. CST Patel, 911 open line. Caller ID shows unknown divided by relay through the PSAP. Audio is, we're hearing what sounds like a marine radio, multiple transmissions. The handler thought it was TV at first, but the cadence is too clean. We're tagging it priority. I was already driving a slow lap of the waterfront. The fog was close and low, rolling off the inlet in long skeins that swallowed street lamps one at a time. "Copy," I said. "Location?" "Cell tower triangulation puts it right on Harbor Key," comm said. "Radius 50 meters. We've called the harbor master. He's on site in 10. Also, heads up, marine communications and traffic services are not reporting a live distress, but they are getting some odd packets on channel 70. RCM SAR is standing by, in case this becomes waterborne." I could feel my shoulders notch up. I've heard my share of pranks and pocket calls and late-night arguments, but 911 carrying marine traffic isn't something you let sit. When boaters need help, seconds get sharp very quickly. "Comms," I asked. "What exactly are you hearing?" The operator put the line on a low-volume monitor that bled into my earpiece. For a moment, I heard wind, then the clean, clipped sound you only get on regulated channels. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, this is..." The rest was a crush of static and a double-tone chirp I recognized from digital selective calling. Then, calmer and farther. All stations. This is MCTS Comox. There are no current distress calls. Vessels in the area maintain watch on 1 to 6. I pulled into the public lot by the quay and killed my headlights so I could see the harbor better. Docks E through H sat like piano keys reaching out into black. The fishing fleet silhouettes were hulled logs against sodium amber. There were no work lights, no boat decks lit the way they usually are when someone's up to something after midnight. The harbor master, Eric, waved at me from the gate, his reflective vest picking up what little light there was. He had the keys and the look of a man who lived with this place in all weather. "What's going on?" he asked when I met him at the chain. 911's getting a patch of marine traffic, I said. "We need to rule out a radio left keyed somewhere, or someone who doesn't know what button they've pushed." Eric nodded and swung the gate for me. "We keep a courtesy radio in the office," he said. "Channel 16 is audible on the docks if the doors are open. I locked up at 22. The liveaboards, most of them are on B and C, are quiet tonight." "You want the office first? Let's walk A through D and listen," I said. "Comms, I'm on the docks with the harbor master. We'll check structures in the office. Can you hold that line on monitor?" "Copy. Line is still open. Be advised, handler is hearing coordinates being read, but they're garbled." We've got JRCC in the loop. We moved down the ramp. The fog had a texture to it now, like fine felt. Out on the slips, the halyards chimed, with that small sound that feels huge at night. Like a pocket full of coins tossed gently into a bowl. Under us, the water pushed against the float with a patient hand. I called out softly, the way you do when you don't want to startle anyone into a misstep. Police, if you called for help, answer me. If you keyed a mic by accident, we'll help you turn it off. We listened. From somewhere not above me on the docks, not behind me on land, somewhere level with my knees to my chest, the little two-tone chirp sounded again. Then a voice, thinner this time, like it had been played twice through. Mayday, 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 this is the Blue. Engine. Fail position light is out. It died into a hiss. Eric looked at me, perplexed. The Blue what? He asked. Blue Heron? I guessed, and then shut that down. Guessing vessel names in the dark isn't smart. You start making the patterns fit. We found nothing on A. On B, 3 liveaboards had their vents ticking. Heat in cold air does that. A skiff rubbed its lines with a soft, rubbery protest. On C, I heard the faintest suggestion of a bell buoy. We don't have a bell buoy in that reach anymore. They replaced it with a light tower years ago. Old charts remember old things. So do old ears. At D, the dockhouse door was locked. I put my ear to it and didn't hear any speaker hiss. Inside, through the wired glass, I could see the courtesy radio, a bright yellow unit bolted to the wall. Its little LED was dark. Office next, Eric said, and we cut back toward shore along the fingers. Comms, I radioed. We're not hearing a live radio keyed on the docks. Is the line still giving you audio? Affirm. Comms said. Stand by. JRCC just confirmed a DSC distress was received at 2-3 and cleared at 2-4 by the same MMSI. It was an old position, years old, likely a test unit or a misprovisioned set turning on. It was not passed to 911, so what's in our ear? I asked, more to myself than to them. Unknown, Comms said carefully. But the handler is also hearing footsteps. Could be you. We reached the office. Eric unlocked the door and flicked on the light. The courtesy radio sat on a shelf above a rack of tide tables free for the taking. It was off. Knob turned all the way left. There was a sign taped to the wall beside it. Emergency. Call 911 or hail McCS on VHF 16. Beneath that, in faded ink, if you are unable to speak, activate DSC distress. Include position. On the desk, the office phone's base had a label maker strip. Emergency line. I didn't touch it. The air inside the office had the smell of salt and paper and damp coats. My radio clicked, just one of those little atmospheric licks that you wait through so you don't have to say again. Then, from the open 911 inches my ear, coordinates. Clean this time. Read with the clipped cadence of someone who had practiced 4-9 degrees, 2 to 1 decimal, 7 north, 1-2-4 degrees, 0 to 4 decimal 3 west. Eric muttered them back under his breath. I saw him doing the same rough mental chart I was doing. That position was not in the harbor. It was up the coast a little, almost on the hillside above the old cannery site. On land. Comms, I said. We just got a position read through the open line. Can JRCC plot those? Already have, they said. It's inland, about 300 meters from your location. Elevation about 60 meters. No known radio installation. RCM SAR will not launch on an inland position. Do you want to patrol on foot? I'm already on foot, I said. We'll head toward the bluff. If we can vector a source, we will. Eric stayed to secure the office. I left him at the door and took the path that wound behind the seafood market and up into the brush. In daylight, that trail gives you a nice view back over the harbor. At night, it gives you sound. I stopped twice to just listen. Below me, the water moved in its huge, patient way. My boots snapped alder twigs with noise that made me feel like I was the loudest thing on the island. Above, a raven shifted on a limb and made a clicking noise like a switch being thrown. The 911 audio gave one more thin burst, a voice counting. then a quieter voice saying, "Nothing heard. Securing watch." I topped the bluff. "There's a skeleton of a small building up there. A concrete box with a steel door and a sticker from Hydro from long ago. The old range light used to be up here. It's been decommissioned and replaced with the tower at the point, but the building's still standing because removing things costs money, and things that don't leak get to stay." I shone my flashlight on the door. The padlock had the look of something that had been wet and dry enough times to get comfortable rust, not fresh scratches. I didn't feel like forcing it for a ghost radio check. I stepped around to the lee side and held still. The fog was thinner up here. I could see the harbor's lamps as little fuzzy pennies. Under me, on the public dock where the kids fish in summer, a single sensor light snapped on from a gull, then snapped back off. My breath was loud in my own head. Then the open line, like a memory that didn't want to go, "Mayday, this is Blue." And the call sign drowned in static that lapped like water does when it's tired. I don't mind saying that a part of me wanted something simple. A radio left on by a liveaboard, a yard worker with the courtesy unit in his pocket. Something I could take hold of, switch off, and give back to comms as a closed loop. So I did what we do. I went back down and started looking for wires. Back at the quay, Eric met me with a flashlight and that square walk people get when they're controlling their worry. "You hear anything up there?" he asked. "Just the harbor doing what it does," I said. "We need to think like a phone, not a boat. If that line is actually from a patch, what would it latch onto?" He thought for a second. "There's an emergency phone at the fuel dock," he said slowly. "But it runs through the marina exchange. It auto-dials 911 if you pick it up. It's old, but it's still wired. And there's the visitor kiosk, has a rinky-dink VoIP handset for after-hours moorage calls. That's on UPS backup." We went to the fuel dock first. The emergency phone was a red box with a handset behind a plastic flap. A sign above it read, "Lift handset for emergency services." Eric swore softly when he saw the flap was slightly open. "Wind does that," he said quickly as if to correct himself. He touched the edge of the flap with one finger, and it snapped closed with a little click. I didn't hear a change in my ear. The open line continued to breathe faint static, as if it had wandered away on its own errands. At the kiosk, things got more interesting. The kiosk is a little timber box with brochures and a roof. Inside is a phone that looks like it belongs in a motel. Big buttons, speakerphone, a laminated instruction sheet. It was lit. "Power's supposed to be off," Eric said, almost to the kiosk. "Unless the UPS is still carrying." He tried the door. Locked. He turned to his key ring and brought up a flat one that looked like it had been cut for this exact little job. Inside, the phone's display read, "Line active. Duration 0 hours 2 minutes and 31 seconds. On the laminated sheet, someone had written in marker months ago, "For emergencies, press 911 and wait. If you cannot speak, do not hang up." "Comms," I said, not trusting myself to call it coincidence. "We've got a visitor kiosk handset showing an active call timer. 2 minutes 31. Affirm," comms said, voice flattening with that sense of something clicking into place. 911 handler confirms open line duration, 2:31. "We can hear what you're hearing. Are you able to end the call on site?" "Stand by," I said. I pressed the speakerphone button. It lit. The little grill offered up the mid-Atlantic hum of the PSAP room keyboards. Someone talking way off mic. The polite voice of a 911 operator saying, "Caller, this is 911. If you need help, stay on the line. If you cannot speak, tap the phone once." I said, "This is police on scene at Harbor Quay. We have your line. We're going to secure the handset. Do you copy?" "Copy," the handler said at once. Relieved in a way you can hear, but that still keeps the steps neat. "Go ahead." I lifted the handset. It felt warm, as if it had been cradled under a hand not long before. The call timer kept climbing. 2:32, 2:33. I hit the hook switch and set the handset back in the cradle. The display paused, then blinked to 0 hours and went blank. In my ear, the open ocean of static pulled away from the beach and vanished. We stood there with the quiet. The kiosk hummed. Eric looked at the phone like it had told him a secret, and then gone to sleep. "Okay," I said, and wrote the things you write. We placed the kiosk's line on an urgent service call for the telecom vendor. We put a note in the CAD for patrols, to check it every night for a week. We walked the docks again, not to find a thing but to settle the part of our bodies that had been bracing for one. We reported the coordinates to JRCC with a note about the old range light building. They thanked us and marked their log. RCM SAR stood down without ever starting their engines, and some part of me was glad their pager didn't have to wake anyone's house. Before I cleared, I stood at the end of D-Dock and looked out toward the point where the new light pulses. It was doing its work, 5 seconds bright, then gone into the fog's sleeve, then back again. The bell sound came once more, just one single buoy note that had no buoy to ring it. Sometimes the harbor coughs up noises from last season, last rig, last job lines left slack, metal remembering to move. We got a report back from the vendor 2 days later. The kiosk had a sticky relay. Moisture had seeped into the little switch that tells the phone whether or not it's on hook, and it had half seized. Their tech wrote, "Intermittent off-hook condition. Line seized, auto-dial memory latching 911. That explained the call. It didn't explain the radio traffic bleeding into a landline. Another note from MCTS said they'd had a burst of DSC tests that night from an old unit reactivated on shore. The distress included stale coordinates, a classic rookie mistake when someone buys used gear at a swap and turns it on without clearing its memory. That explained the position. It didn't explain why our handler had heard both on the same line at the same time. Later that week, Eric told me something I think about more than I mean to. The harbor office used to keep a list of boats and their home numbers on a corkboard. On it was a trawler called the Blue Grace. She'd been retired and cut up at a yard inland the year before I posted here. Her radio would have had an MMSI, he said. If somebody put that set back into service on shore and didn't wipe it, it would still call you with her name in its bones. There's nothing supernatural in that, not really. It's how systems work. They remember what we tell them to. They repeat it back if we don't teach them something new. And yet I can still hear the way that voice faded in, as if it had been traveling a long time to get to our side of the speaker. I drove the key slow for a while after that. If the kiosk's light was on, I'd stop and make sure the display didn't read line active. It didn't, not after the fix. We got no more open lines that sounded like waves pretending to be phones. Every now and then, though, when I park up by the boat launch and cut the engine, I hear, just under the halyards and the tide, a double chirp and a voice that never quite resolves a name. It's probably nothing. It's probably the sound of a place doing what it's done for 100 years. Calling, answering, clearing, standing by. What I can tell you is this. The scariest part was not the thought that I was listening to something I couldn't explain. It was the idea that someone might say a word like Mayday and mean it, and that the word might have to travel long distances through old wires and new networks and still arrive in time for us to hear it. That night, the systems lined up enough to let me stand on a dock at 2 a.m. and be ready if a voice had needed me. Sometimes that's all the job is. You stand in the fog, listen hard, and tell the harbor, I'm here. Story number 4. I'm a general duties senior constable with Sapole, posted far west where the bitumen unspools straight for hours and the sky is a country of its own. Nights out here don't go dark so much as they go wide. The heat from the day leaks out of the road and the wind comes through the salt bush in a way that makes you think someone's walking just behind you, and then remember there's no one for 50 kilometers either way. Compson pinged me at 1:14, voice level like it always is when something doesn't line up. 1 Charlie, we've got a silent 000. Open line, background noise only. Mapping to the old highway servo at Molly Ridge. Caller ID withheld. Operator notes a regular chime on the line. 4-second interval. Can you attend? 1 Charlie copying, I said, already turning the Hilux toward the highway. Any units closer? Negative, Compson said. You're it. AMBO and CFS aware if you spin anything up. Your ETA? 20 out, I told them. Out here, 20 minutes is short. The old servo at Malley Ridge had been shut since the owner passed, and the bypass cut its traffic in half. We still did drive-bys because copper ferries and kids love a place with a roof and a story. Phone shouldn't be live, I added, half to myself and half to the operator. Telstra Shows service disconnected last winter, Compson replied, which is the kind of sentence you say in a steady voice, because you also know what you just said. I pushed through the gears and let the engine settle into that country night thrum. Kangaroos did their last-minute zigzags in the verge. Every now and then, a road train came the other way. 3 trailers, lights like a moving town, its wind drifting over and making the ute shift on its shocks. At the Malley Ridge turnoff, the sign still pointed like it had a job, but the paint was sun-chalked and the arrow had more flies than authority. Compson, I said as I took the dirt. Just confirm. Your operator said a chime. Affirm, the voice in my ear said. 4 seconds. Consistent. Handler says it doesn't sound like a smoke alarm. Not a tone they recognize. I know most of the beeps I'm going to hear in an average month. Low battery chirps, forklift reversing, microwave finishing its day. I didn't know this one, and hearing that someone else didn't either put a little cold coin on my tongue. I rolled up quiet. The servo sat with its canopy like a shoulder hunching against nothing. The power was long cut. The big price sign hadn't lit in years. The pumps under the canopy were gone, just posts left like teeth knocked out. The shop had 2 big glass windows with a cricket pitch of dust behind them. A roller door had been pulled halfway down and locked at knee height the day someone shut it for the last time. And no one had raised it since. The moon was enough to see by. My headlights made the place look more fragile than it needed to, so I killed them. Compson 2, 1 Charlie on scene, I said, stepping out. The smell was dry timber and old engine oil that had soaked into concrete deep enough to keep talking. No obvious activity. I'll do a walk around. Keep your open line. Copy, they said. Timer on the call is at 1 minute 14. Still getting the chime. I stood still first and listened. If you stand long enough in this part of the map, you hear layers. Wind on corrugated iron. A lizard nicking across gravel. Far away. A freight rumble that reaches you late. Under that, down in teeth and bones range, a soft ding clean, not electronic in the way smoke alarms are, more like the service bell on an old counter. 4 seconds. Another ding. 4 seconds. A third. I put my torch on the roller door. The padlock was in place, red dust packed into the little creases. No fresh scuffs. The glass windows at the front had a film of desert on them. I cupped my hands and peered in. The counter was still there, with a jar of cable ties like a second currency and a battered EFT-post terminal that would never beep again. Behind the counter, just where a bell would sit if this were a film about country shops, there was a little brass thing on a spring. Not a button. A bell. Proper. The kind you tap if no one appears with your smokes. Of course, I said quietly, relieved for a second in a way I didn't have to be. Then the ding happened again. My light was on the bell. Nothing touched it. Nothing moved. And it rang just the same. If you've ever had someone smile at you through a window and not be there when you go round the door, you know the feeling. Compson, I said, we've got a bell audible inside the premises. Visual on a counterbell. Door appears secure. I'm going to check for any forced entry before I make. Copy, keep us posted, they said. For awareness, the open line timer is reflecting 1:14. Standing by. 1 minute 14, they'd said before. Still 1:14 now. My skin did a little pull on my forearms that had nothing to do with the air. I walked the back. The storeroom door had a mesh over it and a sign that said, staff, which always makes me want to knock because I've included myself in that word for 20 years. It was locked. The back wall had a little services shed tin roof padlock, a cable running up into the rafters where the old landline would have come in. That padlock had fresh scratches, bright metal on its back, where someone had tried a tool and given up. I put a finger to it. The metal was warm from yesterday's heat, and tonight's nothing. I went back to the front and made the decision. Compson, I'm going to force entry, I said. Exigent circumstances. Possible person inside. CFS not required at this time. Copy 2:1 Charlie, came the reply. Logging as forced for welfare. Your backup's an hour out. We've got you on ICV. Proceed when safe. I popped the roller door with a pry bar and stepped through the dust. My boots made prints that looked surer than I felt. The bell did its 4-second round as if politely ignoring me. I said, police, and then the old habit. Hello? If you've called 000, I'm here. Call out. The shop sound changed with me in it. That happens everywhere. You add your own noise, and the room tunes itself. But there's also a way an empty place stays empty, even when you fill it. The bell sat where I'd seen it, perfect in its simplicity. I put a hand near it, close enough to feel the outwash of air if it had been physically ringing. Nothing that made sense. It dinged again, a small, clean sound that carried and came back. Behind the counter, there was a phone on a cradle. I'd missed it from outside for the dust. Beige plastic. Handset tethered with a curly cord that had once been white. The wall plate it was plugged into had no face, just an old metal bracket and a snip of copper where someone had cut the line halfway between keeping and scrapping. The phone's little red message light was dead. The handset sat perfectly on hook. The number under a square of brittle tape was the shop's minted in the 80s, I bet. The bell dinged again. "Compson," I said, trying to keep my voice even enough to keep my hand steady. Phone inside is still present, but hardline appears physically cut. I also have a manual bell on the counter giving a tone every 4 seconds. "Confirm your line status?" "Open," Compson said, not making it bigger than it was. "And 2-1 Charlie, just note operators getting intermittent crosstalk on the call. Sounds like radio traffic. Could be you. Could be the service feed." "Copy," I said, though it didn't feel like a copy as much as a promise to keep standing up straight. I lifted the handset. It was cold. The sort of cold things get when they've been away from hands for a long time. No dial tone. The bell on the counter gave its little note, regular as a metronome. I pressed the hook switch a couple of times, and then put the handset down like it was someone's old dog. The office behind the counter had a socked-in window and a door with a slide lock that was still thrown. Inside, the desk had a ledger with lines filled in tight, up until the last week 3 summers ago, where the entries thinned like a man stepping back from his job, and then stopped like he'd finally let himself go to bed. In the corner was a sat phone cradle with a dusty docking station. A cracked adhesive label on it said, "Emergency Press, 000 or 112. The little LCD on the base had a ghost of a readout. I hit a button just to see. It lit to life the way old tech does, reluctantly but polite. "Last call. 000. Duration 114. I called Compson because that kind of thing belongs to more than you." "You still got 114 on your timer?" I asked. "Affirm," Compson said at once. 114. "No climb. Want us to drop it?" "Stand fast," I said, and stared at the sat cradle like it might choose what to do next based on how I looked at it. The sat phone itself wasn't in the dock. Just the base and a whipped length of antenna cable that had been unplugged from something long gone. But the base's guts were alive enough to remember and display the last thing it did, and the last thing it did was call 000 and sit open for 1 minute and 14 seconds. "How's that base powered?" I asked the air, and the room told me by pointing my eyes at a little gray box on the wall behind the desk. "Solar controller." A cable ran up and out through a hole to the roof. The panels outside would be enough to keep the base barely alive, to hold on to a number and a timer long after everything else had gone to red dirt. That explained memory. It didn't explain a live line. On the floor under the desk was a UHF set, the kind the old RFDS used to auto-patch back when landlines were dreams and satellites were a luxury. 5-tone cell call still printed above the buttons. The mic was on its hook. The power light was barely there. A little pulse like a heartbeat when you're lying very still. Every 4 seconds, that pulse brightened a fraction. The bell on the counter rang in the same breath. There was no direct physical connection between the two. But my ears, which don't care for wiring diagrams, stapled them together. I pressed the PTT on the UHF mic. "Anyone on this net?" I asked, because even when you know there won't be, you ask. Static acknowledged me warmly, the way static can seem like agreement. Somewhere far off, a station squelched and closed. A gust came through the broken bit of the back door frame, and the shop smelt like rain that had fallen somewhere else. That's when the open line in my ear stopped being just curious and offered up something that made the little coin on my tongue turn to iron. I heard a voice, not words, not a person exactly. The soft intake and release of someone trying not to make noise. Then my own voice, from a minute ago, thinner and late. Compson, 2, 1 Charlie on scene. It walked across my ear like it was crossing a floor after me. Compson, I said. I've got looped audio. I'm hearing my previous traffic on your monitored line. Copy, Compson said. Too steady to be anything else. We're getting bleed. Techs are on a log. Line still shows 1. 14. No progression. I did the thing you do when you have run out of sense and still have to make choices. I formalized it. I'm going to isolate the SAT base, I told them. If anything changes, keep me live. The solar controller had a switch the size of a thumbnail that promised off, with the kind of confidence only switches that small can have. I flicked it. The heartbeat in the UHF set died. The SAT cradle went from tired glow to nothing. The bell on the counter did not ring. The room took a breath and held it. Compson? I asked. Open lines dropped, they said, a note of relief so careful it might as well have been science. Timer cleared. Handlers marking, as concluded. You all right there? I am, I said, meaning it, and I stood for a while longer in that shop so my body could believe it too. Then, I did the things we do. I photographed the locks, the door, my own prints, the dust I'd disturbed. I put a little bit of tape on the back door where the frame had a split so I'd know if anyone else came back between now and the daylight. I wrote a brief for Telstra, a report for Compson, and a note for the property file. SAT phone base isolated due to repeated emergency dial. No occupants. Nothing moved except me. On my way out, I put the roller door back as best I could and set the padlock through the eye. It is a strange kindness to lock an empty place, but I have done it more times than I can count. You'll want it tied off with a bow and a diagnosis. We got some of that later. Telstra sent a contractor who sent an email that said, residual voltage in an abandoned line can make an old cradle think a hook switch is half lifted. Moisture, insects, and solar trickle can give enough intermittency to make a thing call when it thinks it's meant to. The SAT base was configured with 000 as its emergency preset. A heat and cool cycle could have done the rest. The UHF set, he wrote, likely bled into the line enough to give our handler the hint of radio traffic. Remove power, remove problem. He was right, I think. Mostly. We isolated the gear and the call stopped. Compson didn't get any more open lines from Malley Ridge. The next week, I drove past in daylight and saw wedge tails on the fence posts, full of some other stories ending. In the office, the ledger still sat open to its last neat row. There were 2 things the emails didn't put a bow on, because they didn't need to for their part. One was the bell. No one wrote a memo about a counterbell that rang by itself. Air can move anything if it tries hard enough at the right frequency. A spring can remember a shape with no hand on it. We accept those sentences because if we don't, we'd have to accept too much else. The other was the timer. When I'd asked Compson the first time, they'd said 1 minute 14. When I'd asked again later, after I'd turned the base off, they'd said 1 minute 14. The SAT cradle, woken just long enough to show me a number, had offered up the same. Maybe the handler had glanced at their screen at just the same moment both times. Maybe I'd wanted that symmetry so badly that I held it in my head and refused to let it move. A fortnight later, I was on nights again when Compson said my call sign and paused in a way that meant there was a small present hidden in the sentence. 2. 1 Charlie. Just for your situational awareness, we had a silent 000 map briefly to Malley Ridge again. 1 second only. Then nothing. Might have been the system clearing a log. No action required. I said, copy, because that's the thing that has held me up every time something like this happens. The word is a ladder we put in the air and climb together until we're back on the ground. Sometimes people ask if the job is frightening. I tell them the truth I can carry. What gets to you isn't what you can see. It's the things you hear and can't file anywhere. An empty shop that keeps a bell going on a 4-second beat. A solar trickle powering a phone base that still has an emergency number in its bones. A voice you know is your own walking into your ear a second time, as if you're late to your own arrival. I still pull into Malley Ridge when I'm passing. Habit, respect. I check the roller door and the tape on the back frame. It's always where I left it now, leaving me oddly grateful. I stand in the doorway and listen to the kind of quiet you get only in places that used to serve everyone and now serve no one. If the wind is right, something metallic somewhere gives a soft ring. Not quite a bell and not a bell. The sort of sound you'd call a coincidence if you had to give it a name in a report. I write my report. I drive on. The road goes wide again and the stars come down low enough to ride beside you. And the radio in the ute sounds like it always does when nothing's wrong, people finishing their sentences, the click of other men's microphones, the gentle discipline of voices doing their work. It is enough. Story number 5. I'm a Bundespolizei officer seconded to the Autobahnpolizei for night shifts in our district. A stretch of motorway that runs flat across fields and then dives into forested cuts where fog sits low like a held breath. Night work on the BAB feels like you're on a river that never quite stops moving. The lorry lights run in slow constellations. Cat's eyes blink by. And every few kilometers a blue SOS symbol flashes on a pole that still promises help to people who don't know that phones now live in every pocket. The call came at 041. Lightstell in my ear. Funkroof name 21 thirds common? I keyed up. 21 thirds go. The dispatcher didn't pad it. We've got an open 110 from a Notrufsoil, Autobahn 9, KM 214, direction Sud. No voice. Just a periodic tone. It's called back 3 times in 5 minutes. The Autobahnmeisterei says that column was removed last year. You're closest. I looked over at Becker, my partner. The blue wash from the dash made him look like he'd been carved out of the night and set back in. He lifted his eyebrows in the way he does when something that should be simple chooses not to be. Copy, Lightstell, I said. We're heading. Can you mark the exact lay-by? Between exit Feldbrunn and the small bridge at the stream, she said. We've notified Meisterei. They're pulling a crew if needed. We'll set the Wechselverkehrszeichen to 80 for the stretch. We still have the open line. Operator reports the tone is at 4 seconds. Steady. The 4-second detail made me think of smoke alarms, but those chirp like they're trying to nag you. What the handler imitated into her mic was different, cleaner, like a metronome the road itself might keep. I rolled us off the Rastenlage and into the flow. We took the fast lane for a bit, beacons off to keep from scaring the column of trucks into a dance. Then eased to the right, where the hard shoulder gives you the sense that the world has once more decided on edges. Fog lay in drifts Nebelbanki, so we rode inside a tunnel of our own lights. Reflector posts rose and fell like a heartbeat. Lightstell came back. 21 thirds, be aware. The line timer has frozen at 132. It's still open. Operator is hearing vehicle noise in the background, consistent with motorway at night. We took the Feldbrunn exit and looped back to come in from the southbound side, so the kilometer count would climb the right way. The signs just before the stretch had been forced to 80, then 60. The little red rings around numbers that ask rather than shout. I put the beacons on only when we were on the hard shoulder. Blue LEDs scraping the fog into layers. The lay-by at KM 214 looked like all of them. A strip of broken asphalt with a bin, a battered picnic table, a shoulder that declines into grass and ditch, and a metal plate in the ground where a Notrufsoil would have bolted in once. Lightstell, 21 thirds at location, I said. No column present. Stand by. I stepped out and let the cool hit my face. The traffic felt like a weather system moving air. Sound that came at you and pulled away. Every 4th second, something that was not a truck delivered a little ping to the air. Something you could feel more than hear. Becker heard it too. That your tone? He asked into his mic for comms to catch. Affirm, Leitstelle said. Still on. We're recording. We carry a triangle and a couple of extra flares for when we decide that even people doing the right speed need more warning that 2 blue ghosts are standing by the road. Becker trotted back and set the triangle 50 meters behind us, then 2 flares that took the fog and made it red. I walked the lay-by, torch along the gravel edge. The metal plate where the column had been was just that, a plate with 4 bolts, capped, a little nest of spiderweb in one corner that had kept the summer's dust. No footprints that weren't mine and Becker's. The ditch held a trickle. The grass was bent where roe deer had crossed before we arrived. The ping kept happening, regular and unbothered. I went to where the telephone line would have come up inside the column. There's often a service box in the verge, or a junction with a lid like a bread tin. I found one off the lay-by, a small square metal cover flush with the ground and a stamped number. I pried it up. Inside, a cable joint sat in a resin pot. Someone had done their job. The resin had set like amber. There were dead leaves in the cavity, but not old enough to be a decade's worth of mess. No rats. No fresh work. It looked content. "Lightstell," I said, "we've got nothing above ground. You still reading KM 214? There was a pause, the kind that means a dispatcher is looking at her screen and deciding if the thing it says should be said in a steady voice or in a steady voice with eyebrows raised. 21/3, we just had a second 110 from a Nutrifsoil at KM 213.2, also southbound, open line, same tone. The first is still up. We cannot have two columns removed." Becker and I looked at each other. He made a little rolling motion with his hand that meant, "We go forward." "We'll follow it down," I said. "If Meisteray arrives, have them hold at 214. We moved. The lay-by at 213.2 had a column, orange, with the blue SOS sign. Its little door was shut. A padlock dangled uselessly, because the lock sits inside and the padlock is for discouraging, not securing. The lens over the small status LED was dark, no power. This was the kind of thing you could show to someone who needed proof of the world being ordinary. The cover was clean, the hinge was stiff. The spider inside the upper lip had built for itself a private room. And yet when I put my ear against the door, I heard the tone, right behind the metal, even though the LED said no juice. "Lightstell, at 213.2, I said. "We have a column present, but apparently unpowered. Tone audible." I'm opening it. I popped the door. Inside, the guts were a time capsule, an old handset with a curly cable, a little board with a relay, a modern the color of beige that companies stopped making and started forgetting. A battery pack sat where a battery pack had no right to still be sitting. The date handwritten on the pack said 4 years ago. If it had ever held a charge, it shouldn't have. I touched the handset. It was cold, in the way metal is cold at night, and also in the way no hand had touched it for a long time. The tone came from the guts, not the speaker. Even that wasn't so strange. Electronics can sing when they want to. I looked for a SIM. The newer columns use GSM to route calls, but found only the old copper feeds, crimped and labeled. A small sticker on the inside of the door said, "In case of power failure, handset will seize line if hook is lifted. Don't rely on battery." "Comms," Becker said softly, his voice the sound of a man whose hands are in a place they trust, but whose head is keeping the file open anyway. "What's your timer?" 1 minute 32, Lightstell said at once. "For both lines." "Both," I said, as if making a sentence out of it would make it less ridiculous. The Autobahnmeisterei rolled up then, a sprinter with an arrow board that threw amber into the fog like a slow heartbeat. The foreman, a man I'd seen at more nighttime closures than I can count, climbed out with a key ring that would open every piece of this road we needed opened. "You've got a ghost phone," he said without making fun of us. "We've been having trouble with the decommissioning. Some parts die, some parts pretend." He opened the base of the column with his key and showed me the way the cables had been looped. "Copper's dead," he said. "We cut it here when the fiber went in for the VMS. No dial tone possible." My radio hissed, and the operator we all know by her laugh when it's not a night like this one said, 21/3, we've now got a third line. KM 212.5, same characteristics. The others are still present. I've got the operator holding all three. There are no calls on the public network flagged for 112 or 110 from mobiles in your radius. 3 open lines from 3 emergency phones on a stretch, where one had been a hole and one had been wired to nothing. I did the maths of what we should do next and did that instead of thinking about the bit where a system was talking to us from more mouths than it had. We asked Meisteray to set the arrow board to close the hard shoulder and push traffic over. We planned to walk the next lay-by on foot so we'd hear what the world had to tell us. We reached 212.5 by walking the verge with our torches bouncing in front like second thoughts. The column there was wrapped in plastic with a tag. Außer Betrieb, out of service. The tag looked official. The tape looked old. Through the cloudy plastic, the handset sat neat against its rest. The ping felt closer here, which is a useless sentence because it measured the same on my watch as it had everywhere else. Becker peeled a corner of the plastic back. I took a breath like a diver and opened the little door. The LED inside blinked once, as if greeting us, and then stayed dark. The tone did not come from here. It came from the somewhere that sat between our ears. "Lightstell," I said. "Are you still seeing all three?" "Affirm," she said. And I pictured her screen showing 3 blinking points like a constellation you don't know how to name. "The timer is holding at 132 for all. No voice. The operator reports faint radio traffic, possibly yours." We stood with the fog tickling our faces and the road forgetting and remembering us with each truck that moved the air. "You know," Becker said to me, to the column, to the amber light that threw us long on the wet asphalt. "My father used to stop at these with no car in sight, just to check they worked. He said the road talked back if you gave it the chance." I said radios talk enough. We kept moving. At 211.8, the box was gone, footprint only. At 211, there was one more present. Graffiti half sanded off. The paint under the scratches was that institutional orange that never stops looking cheap no matter how much it saves a life. We opened and closed doors. We looked at cables. We used the little test handset the Meisterei foreman carried that can clip to copper and tell you if there's the faintest hope of a voice at the other end. It hissed like an old seashell. The tone kept its 4-second patience. 21 thirds, Leetstell said, less clipped now, because this had become more of a conversation than a list of tasks. "We're going to bring Telekom Bereitschaft into this. Their on-call tech says the Notruf Säulen run through their own network to an exchange before we ever see the line. I'm going to read this precisely. He's seeing a legacy node waking up and initiating calls that never complete. He says there should be no power to that node." "Where is that node?" I asked. "On the motorway or in town?" "In a cabinet near the small bridge at the stream," she said. "Which is 214. I finished for her because we had started there. We went back. The amber arrow had done its work. The trucks had given us a lane. The fog took their wake and shook it out. I looked for the cabinet I'd ignored earlier, because familiar is invisible when you drive past it enough. A green metal box at the edge, knee-high, with a stamped number that meant a map existed, where this thing was not just a box, but a known quantity. The Meisterei foreman had a key for it too. He popped the lock and lifted the lid like a man looking in on a sleeping child. Inside, a tangle of order. Patch panel. Lightning protection. An old power supply with a sticker everyone had forgotten to peel when they stopped updating the system. A sealed lead-acid battery, not much bigger than my hand, sat under a strap. A small LED on the power supply winked in the slowest, laziest way alive, because alive was easier than not. Every 4 seconds, a relay inside the power supply clicked. That was our metronome. A line card alongside it had a row of tiny red lights and one green. None changed. But the click made a little harmonic that took the metal of the box and made it sing. The phone system, a lingering part of it anyway, had been making phantom calls to an exchange that no longer listened, and because our side of the network is kind enough to hold out a chair for anyone who dials 110, the operator had been set to listening to a box tell the night about itself. Telecom tech says, "Pull the battery, gentlemen. Lightstell, read to us." The foreman looked at me. I nodded. He unclipped the strap, lifted the battery, and the relay's little song stopped. It's always surprising how sudden quiet can be. The fog didn't change. The trucks didn't either. But something let go. "Comes?" Becker asked. "Lines have dropped," she said, relief making the words sound like a hand put on a shoulder. "All 3. Timer cleared. We stood a while anyway. You learn to listen for the part that hasn't finished talking yet." The Meisterei man bent and put his hand on the metal lid, as if he could feel the last of the power ghost through it. "These cabinets used to have heaters in winter," he said, "to keep the condensation off. Someone turned that off when they turned off most of the rest. Moisture does its thing. A relay sticks, and it remembers the only job it ever had. I could have left the night there and been satisfied, and if this were a simple job, I would tell you that's what we did. But I have to tell you about the last thing, which is small enough to ignore, and that is exactly why it won't leave me. Back at 214, after we thanked the foreman and logged the numbers and dates, I walked to the layby's metal plate because a bit of me wanted to see if a thing that wasn't there could still convince me it was. I stood where the column would have been and called out, more to the habits that keep me upright than to the world. Notruf? Polize. Hello? The motorway answered me the way it answers everyone with noise and nothing to hold. My radio made the little double click that it does when someone else keys up on the same channel but says nothing. Then Lightstell's voice, not live but thinner, Funkroof name 21 thirds common? Followed by my own. 21 thirds go. It played through in a snipped cadence like a recording caught between hands. I looked down at the cabinet a few meters off. The battery was sitting on the grass like a loaf of bread you didn't mean to carry home. The lid was closed. The foreman had locked it. The relay couldn't click, with no power. Lightstell, I said, keeping my voice like the road, steady whether it wanted to be or not. We're hearing a short loop of our first transmission, 2 seconds long on air. Do you have any bleed? Negative, she said. I could hear her turning in her chair to look at the other operator. We are clean. No playback on our side. Might be multipath on your radio. Or the trucks. We get that sometimes. A hard surface sends a reflection, and you catch yourself as you go by, smiling at yourself from a second ago. It's physics, and also a feeling you carry around. I said verstanden, and we cleared the job. Telecom sent a man in daylight who unplugged more than one thing and wrote us a formal letter with the words legacy infrastructure and intermittent line seizure. The Autobahnmeisterei put a tag on the cabinet and a sticker with a QR code that directed maintenance to the right page in a manual almost no one has a paper copy of anymore. Lightstell added a note to the CAD. No action required if repeat open line at KM 214 to 211. Refer telecom ticket number. That's the sort of sentence that keeps the world from having to feel strange for the next person who comes on at 041 with their coffee still too hot. A week later, we were out on a different stretch, same hour, when Lightstell keyed up with a smile in her voice. 21 thirds, only for your information. We had a 1 second open 110, flagged to 213.2, no tone, immediately cleared. Probably the system saying goodbye. I didn't answer with anything clever. I said copy, and watched the cat's eyes blink back at me from the line we follow more nights than not. On breaks, in motorway service car parks where the coffee tastes like a decision you can live with for half an hour, I still notice the old columns. Some have fresh paint, some lean like they're listening. Here and there, a plate sits where a thing used to stand and do work for people who had no one else to ask. If you ask me whether it was frightening, I'll say no in the way I mean it and yes in the way I don't always tell. It's not the relay clicking in a box that was supposed to be dark. It's not the tone that stitched the fog into 4-second pieces. It's this. That a system designed to hear help kept listening even after we told it its job was done. That somewhere in the cables that cross this country, there are still paths left that remember a handset lifted and a person leaning in to say a word. And that when you stand on a lay-by at 041 with your partner putting a triangle in the road behind you, the night sometimes repeats your voice back to you just to check you meant it. Story number 6. I'm a patrol officer assigned to a Koban, one of those small police boxes you see at corners and stations, just off the river levee in Saitama. Nights here are soft in a way that fools you. The air hums with old vending machines that never sleep, the river mutters at the pilings, and the level crossing 2 blocks up sings its little chime for freight that crawls through town while everyone pretends not to hear it. Summer hits with cicadas. Winter replaces them with a thin cold that makes even the neon look brittle. You learn to walk in it, to listen for what belongs and what doesn't. It was 2:23 when headquarters Chuo called my unit. Car 34. Be advised. Silent 110 from a public phone. Open line. Mapping to Asahicho River Park. Shelter 3. No voice. Only a periodic beep every 5 seconds. Please confirm status and respond. 3, 4, status 2, I said, already sliding into the driver's seat. My partner, Shimada, set his cup down and pulled his jacket zipper up with one hand. That noiseless zip that says he's been doing this longer than me. He flicked the K-car's lights on low. 5-second beep? He asked. That's not a smoke alarm. Chuo says public phone, I said. Green box type. He made a small face. Those are being pulled. We still have one down by the boat ramp. The streets en route were empty. The footbridge over the canal threw our headlights back at us, and the vending machines outside the closed noodle shop sat under their own blue dome, humming like content refrigerators in a dream. I caught the little sound of the level crossing warning up the road, and thought about how everything that keeps you safe insists on being heard over and over. "Chuo," I asked as we turned down toward the river. "Do you still have the line?" "Affirm 3-4, the operator said, voice professionally even. "Open line remains. Timer reads 1 minute, 10 seconds. Still hearing a clean beep every 5 seconds, constant." Handler attempted voice prompt. No response. I glanced at Shimada. 1:10, I said quietly. He nodded like you. Nod to a number that might mean nothing and might mean more. We rolled the car up by the floodgate and killed the engine. The river park was a long, dark ribbon at that hour. A path, a few benches, the outline of the shelters like square shoulders on the levee. The municipal signboards about typhoon season and evacuation routes looked like they were waiting for a class that had been canceled. We got out into air that smelled like damp concrete and a version of grass that had been cut last week by someone who didn't work at night. "Police," I called in Japanese and then in English. Out of habit, I've picked up Kisatsu Desu. It travels differently in the dark, that word. Half the time you feel like you're telling the night about yourself, just so it knows you're in it. Shelter 3 was a simple roof over a bench, a place for shade on a summer morning. The payphone stand stood beside it, the green NTT box you see all over, except this one had its handset gone and its coin slot taped over months ago, a notice typed and rain creased. Out of service. To make emergency calls, dial 110 or 119 on your mobile. The lower cabinet door was locked. A little spider had invested the gap around the hinge. No light. Nothing live. And yet the air near it had a beep in it, clear, polite, patient. 5 seconds. Then again, "Chuo," I said over my shoulder mic. "We're at Asahicho Shelter 3. Handset missing. Payphone out of service. We are hearing a 5-second beep in the vicinity. Any chance your map is off?" "Negative. 3-4, she said. "Radius 30 meters. It's holding. Beep is clearer on the line now. Stand by." The line, faint in my earpiece, offered that same metronome I could hear in front of me. It wasn't a smoke alarm's throaty complaint. It wasn't a microwave's impatient chirp. It had the exact timbre of a coin dropping back in a metal tray. Shimada crouched, ran his light along the base. "No fresh pry marks," he said. "No new footprints in the dust except ours. If a kid came down here to mess about, he didn't leave much of himself. We did a slow circle. The river was down. The pilings tapped twice as wake from some boat far away arrived late. A heron hunched like a statue made a noise I won't try to spell. Then something I hadn't heard in a long time eased itself in. A faint, loudspeaker tone, drifting from somewhere downriver, one high note, then another. In daytime, the city uses the disaster broadcast speakers to play a melody at 5 in the afternoon, a gentle lullaby that shepherds kids home. Yuyake Koyake, orange skies. We all know it. I had no business hearing it at 2:26. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Shimada tilted his head. "I do," he said laconic. "It's not 5 o'clock. "Chuo," I said. "We've got faint audio on scene that sounds like municipal broadcast chime. Can you confirm if there's any test going on?" 3, 4, negative, she said at once. "No scheduled test. City Crisis Management reports no broadcast. And be advised we are now hearing the same chime through the open line." We moved toward the source. The levee path took us by Floodgate 7, the big steel slab with its red standby light that looks like a single eye closed. Next to it, set into a pedestal, was a gray call box with a button behind plexiglass. "Emergency Floodgate Operations City River Office. Use only in case of emergency." The panel was dead. No light. I pressed the plexiglass lightly. It flexed under my finger and then returned to itself. The beep kept its metronome. The chime drifted away and didn't return. We kept sweeping under the shelters and along the railing. At the boat ramp, we found the second green payphone, the one Shimada had mentioned. This one was intact. Its little display was dark, We opened its service flap with the universal key we carry for municipal boxes we're allowed to look into. Inside, algae dust and a sticker from the contractor that last maintained it. If handset is missing, line seizes automatically for emergency call, the print said in clean letters. Emergency calls are free. Chuo, I said. We're going to lift the handset on the intact phone to see if it's the source. Understood. 3, 4, came the calm. We still have one open line from this area. Timer. 1 minute 10 seconds. I picked up the handset. It was cold, clean, as if no one had touched it in 2 weeks. No dial tone. Shimada pressed the emergency button. Nothing moved. The 5-second beep did not change. I held my breath without meaning to, and then let it go. We pushed out farther along the path. The streetlights became sparser. A cluster of mosquito traps buzzed like little diplomatic pouches of summer. My earpiece made that brief, soft whoosh of someone on the other end leaning closer to their mic. Then I heard myself the words I'd said 2 minutes ago bleed back into my ear, thinner. Chuo. We're at Asahi-cho Shelter 3. The sensation is hard to explain. Hearing your own voice in real time is ordinary in our job. Hearing it arrive late, like it took a slower train than you did, is not. Chuo, I said, keeping my tone professional because you can control that if nothing else. We're getting looped audio of my own transmission on the monitored line. Copy 3, 4, she said right away. We're also hearing a faint loop. Tech says it may be a bridge in the system. The timer is still 110. 1:10. I said quietly to Shimada again without looking at him. He grunted, handed me the light, and went to kneel beside a small green steel cabinet I'd almost missed. It sat half-hidden behind a stand of tall grass near the shelter, a Riverside telecom box with a city sticker. Flood warning, divided by payphone, divided by environmental sensors. He looked at me, then at the lock. Your call, he said. Exigent circumstances, I told the dark. We may have an emergency telephone seizing a line. I pried the cabinet open and lifted the panel. Inside was a tidy set of modules that looked like they had been installed in different years by men who believed different things. There was an analog to IP gateway with LEDs trying for a pulse. A lead-acid battery, the size of a lunchbox. A module labeled BOSI Disaster Broadcast Interface. A bundle of copper pairs ran into the bottom where they vanished into ground. And a small speaker grill inside the door, as if the cabinet sometimes talked back during tests. Every 5 seconds, a relay clicked and a tiny LED on the gateway flashed. The beep we were hearing wasn't from the payphone box. It was the cabinet singing to itself. The disaster broadcast module had a green light that idled, then glowed, then idled again, like a sleeping thing thinking about work. A handwritten note taped to the inside of the door said, "Test at 17 on first Tuesday. If alarm is stuck, cycle power." Chuo, I said. We've located a municipal cabinet that ties into both the payphone and the broadcast speaker network. We're seeing a gateway with a stuck relay. I can power cycle. Affirmative. 3, 4, she said. Stand by. City River office is on the line. They authorize power cycle. Shimada held the light while I flipped the breaker to the gateway module. The relay stopped. The 5-second beep dissolved into the night, like it was never there. In my ear, the open 110 line made a sound like a breath being taken and then let go. Line dropped, the operator said softly. Timer cleared. We stood there with the cabinet open, smelling metal and old plastic in the river. The disaster broadcast module remained lit, humming to itself. We waited for something to argue with us. Nothing did. Let's not close it yet, Shimada said. Watch it a minute. We did. Amid the ordinary night, the passing of one car on the far bank, the soft contact of water with stone, a raccoon dog somewhere in the brush making that chitter something else unfolded. The little speaker grill inside the cabinet gave a ghost of the 5 o'clock chime, not the full melody, just the first 2 notes, as if the system had been carrying them around under its tongue. And then, thin and distant, a human voice over the monitored line in my ear, a whisper that was more breath than word. Not Japanese, not English, maybe not language, I felt the hair on my neck truly rise for the first time that night. "Chuo?" I asked, "because that's the lifeline. Did you copy any speech?" "Negative," she said, taking me at face value. No voice. "You're clear to secure." We secured the cabinet. We put a marker tape through the latch to see if any curious soul would come back before the city tech could. We walked the path one more time with our lights low, letting the river tell us it was doing what rivers do. By the time we got back to the car, my radio had calmed itself into weather and traffic and a request for assistance 2 towns over with an intox who had decided his home was a taxi. The world rearranged itself back into solvable problems. Day shift followed up with the river office. Their tech came out with a key and a tablet and a matter-of-factness I envy sometimes. He wrote the kind of report that fences these things in. Condensation in the cabinet had let a relay hang half-closed. Analog line seized automatically when handset missing at Shelter 3. Disaster module's test timer had glitched and offered its chime to the line. The analog to IP gateway had pushed a call into the emergency switch matrix because 110 gets right of way. He wrote, "Legacy equipment. Recommend replacement." He was probably right. He taped an extra silica bag inside and promised the cabinet a new gasket. That would have been enough. It mostly is. But a week later, just after the first train of the morning sang its song down the embankment, Chuo pinged our unit with the sort of smile you can hear without seeing. 3, 4. For your awareness, we received a 1-second 110 from Asahicho River Park again. No audio. Mapped, then cleared. Telecom reports the back end is still learning its manners. No action required. I said copy like I always do and left it alone. Mostly. Some nights, when the wind is honest and the river smells like it means to, I park by Shelter 3 before my shift ends. Engine off, lights off, and I listen. The cabinet hums not at all now. Sometimes the 5 o'clock chime drifts in from a village up the river at the right hour, and the faintest echo ricochets off the flood wall and arrives with me a half-second late. Sometimes a heron grumbles. Sometimes I hear my own voice in my head the way I heard it in my ear that night, arriving a moment after me. Kisatsu. Disu. If you called, I'm here. I don't carry ghosts around on purpose. I carry procedures and checklists, and the solid comfort of forms that ask the right questions. But I won't pretend I don't think about the way a cabinet with an old relay and a tired battery tried to make a phone call to us over and over until someone came to listen. We did. We listened. We found a switch and turned it off. That's the job on good nights. On the other nights, the job is the same but feels different. You stand next to something that remembers a sound it was built to make, and you tell it, gently, it can rest. Story number 7. I'm a sergeant with SAPs out of a small station in Mpumalanga, the old coal belt where headgear silhouettes still stand against the sky like scaffolding for clouds. At night, things carry further than they should, geckos clicking on walls, hadatas arguing from river gums, a generator across the valley picking up slack for load shedding. You drive a backy down roads where the verge is tall grass that remembers Veld fires, and the robots blink dead because the power's out and everyone knows how to treat an intersection like a conversation instead of a rule. The call came at 1:52. Control's voice in my ear had that practiced calm we all learn to put on when something doesn't stack neatly. Station to Alpha 16, copy a 10111. Silent call. Open line. No voice. Two-tone alert every few seconds. Triangulating to Kamadi Colliery. Gate 2 Old Pump House on the East Servitude. Security will meet you at the outer boom. Flying squad is 30 away. You're closest. Alpha 16 copy, I said. ETA 12. Any repeat calls? Affirm. Control said. It's redialed twice. Operator reports background noise like machinery, a stable hum, then a brief tone, then nothing. Call timer is holding at 2 minutes 7 seconds. It hasn't climbed. We're logging as priority 1 until proven otherwise. 2:07. I glanced at my partner, Endlovu. He gave that small lift of the shoulders that says, it's probably a sticky relay or a bored kid with a SIM card. It's also 2 in the morning on a weeknight and we don't get bored kids out by old mines. He checked the rifle safe out of habit, then settled with his arm on the door, watching the verges for eyes. Load shedding had the valley flatter than usual. The mines that were still live keep their own lights. The ones that died have little left to show anyone but stars. Komati had closed its underground a few years back. The edges of it sprawled wider than the town itself, slimes, dams, vent shafts capped with concrete, a causeway over a stream that looks like it might choose a different direction if anyone gave it ideas. At the outer boom, a guard in a yellow jacket waved us down. The reflective tape threw the backie's light back at us as if it had opinions. "Evening, Sarge," he said. As if there is such a thing. "I'm Themba. I've got the inner gates on manual. There's no power to the pump house side during load shedding. We heard control on the radio. We also heard, 'I'll show you.'" He hit the button that shouldn't have worked, and the boom made that tired mechanical noise of metal choosing to try anyway. We rolled in on crushed stone that sounded loud. Past the office's game of shadows in their own windows, there was a lane along a fence topped with tired razor wire. Beyond, flat ground where a building sat half swallowed by bush. A tall steel pipe thrummed faintly with water. I marked it as alive, even though we were going to a place we thought was dead. "Pump house?" I asked. "Yeah," Themba said. "It used to push water out of the old workings. Keeps the low points dry so they don't drown your neighbors. Civil guys run it now, but the control gear is old." "Control," I said on my shoulder mic. "Alpha 1-6 on scene, Komati Gate 2. Meeting security, moving to pump house. Keep your line open." "Copy. 1-6. Came back, that hinged calm again. "Operator still has the tone at regular intervals. Timer remains 2-0-7. We parked near the fence and went the rest on foot, because a backie's engine can drown out little sounds that tell you things. The air had that damp of water under concrete, and the metallic breath old machinery lets out when no one's asked it for anything in a while. The pump house was a square brick building with a steel door, and a smashed louver where someone had tried for copper once, and wound up with a handful of cuts for their trouble. The lock bore the mark of 20 years. A smoothness where hands had done what hands always do. Inside, the dark was the kind that comes from lights that once knew their job and no longer could. Our torches drew a room out of shadow, a run of control panels, a big red stop button the size of a child's palm, a rack of old equipment with labels from companies that don't exist anymore. A sump well sat behind a metal railing. Water moved slow below, making a sound like a throat swallowing. The hum control had mentioned was there, but more like the memory of hum transformer cores holding just enough charge to pretend, and the tone. Every few seconds, clean as a wristwatch. A short, two-note chirp, as if a device was clearing its throat to speak and then changing its mind. "Police," I called out, "because you always do English, then Zulu. If you called 10111, I'm here. Call back to me. Don't move if you're injured." The room absorbed my voice and returned it to me a half-beat later, softer. My torch slid along a cabinet door with a mimeograph warning in faded red. "Do not silence alarms. Attend to cause." "Charming," Ndlovu said under his breath. Themba did a small sign of the cross where he thought we couldn't see. "He's a professional like we are. But everyone chooses their blanket on nights like this." Against the far wall, there was a gray cabinet with a rotary phone symbol embossed into the paint. It had a handset cradle bolted to the front. The plastic was yellowed with age, and the curly cord had that hard memory of a shape nobody uses anymore. I put my light on it and saw the label above the cradle. "Emergency mind control dial. 9 for 10111. It wasn't plugged into a landline. A cable ran from it into the control cabinet behind, which itself was cabled into a junction with Telcom, stamped on a brass plate, and below that, a small UPS unit with a battery pack someone had taped into place like they didn't want to think about it again. The chirp seemed to come from the UPS, not the handset. Every 5 seconds. I put my fingers on the cabinet door and felt that little metallic tick you get when a relay throws without moving anything you can name. "Control," I said. "We've got an old emergency phone set hooked to a UPS and a panel. Looks like it can dial out to the public network via whatever's left in here. Do you still have the open line?" "Affirmative," she said. "And be advised we're now hearing environmental audio, water movement, Matches your location. The timer remains 207. 207, I said without meaning to, and the room made the number sound like I'd put it on a shelf. We did the practical things. We checked for fresh footprints, just our own. We looked for pry marks on doors, none. We checked the sump for signs anyone could have fallen, grating intact and bolted. We shone our torches down the stairwell to the lower level water lines, painted the walls at 3 different heights like years on a child's doorframe. The bottom step was slick but not flooded. It smelled old, but not rotten. Then the open line in my earpiece did something I can't explain in a way that would satisfy a person who needs wires and diagrams. I heard myself, delayed by long seconds, saying, "Control, Alpha 16 on scene." My own voice. The vowels flattened by the little speaker. The words a fraction thinner, like they'd come back from a long walk. I tapped my earpiece as if that would fix physics. "Control, we've got looped audio of my earlier transmission," I said, keeping my tone in the register that keeps your hands steady. "Are you relaying?" "-16, she said. "We're hearing it too. Operator reports intermittent loop. It's recorded and time-stamped. No active playback on our side." Ndlovu lifted the handset off its cradle, a natural thing to do when a phone is trying to call you from a time that doesn't match yours. He held it to his ear, listened for a couple of seconds, then shook his head. "Nothing. No dial tone. But I can feel something." He put his finger on the hook switch and pressed down. The UPS chirped in time. The panel on the cabinet, a little 7-segment display that once meant numbers to someone, flashed 27, then went blank, then flashed again as if deciding whether to remember. "Charming twice," he said. Themba stepped back to the door, half in, half out, like a man who wants to respect whatever lives in rooms more than he fears it. "We hear that tone at the gate too when the big pumps start," he offered softly. "Just tonight it was calling by itself." "Control," I said. "We're going to isolate the UPS and see if that clears the line. Any objection?" "Do so," she said. "Telecoms on our end say a legacy auto dialer can latch line under low voltage. They also say there is no line provision to that point." "We're curious." "So were we." I crouched and looked at the UPS. It had been asked to live longer than it wanted to. A small rocker switch promised oaf. I hesitated because I knew if I flipped it and the room went quiet, I'd have to decide what to feel. Then I put my thumb on it and let it fall. Silence is not just the absence of noise. In rooms like this, it cleaves you. The chirp stopped. The hum dropped by a whisper you don't notice until it's gone. The water kept the sound it had because water doesn't care about our circuits. In my ear, the 10111 line made a soft, polite pop and then went flat. Control's voice arrived a beat later, light with relief in a careful way. "Open line ended 1-6. Timer cleared, marking the event." We didn't leave. We stood still in that collected quiet, because sometimes the only way to hear what else the night thinks is for you to stop telling it your version. In the still, something else took its turn. The little speaker in the cabinet, one of those piezo discs that can make more noise than you think, offered up 2 slow beeps. Not the chirp we'd been hearing, but a tone I recognized from safety drills in a different life. Mine evacuation pre-tone. Then a faint voice, pre-recorded, old, "Attention all sections." And the rest couldn't push through the years of dust. It was a ghost of a system, reminding itself what it had been meant to say. "Control?" I asked. "Do you copy any voice on your side?" "Negative," she said. "Only ambient. No speech." She paused a beat. "Security control for the mine is on the line here. They report an old auto dial list had 10,111 inches, slot 9. They thought that list was purged when operations ceased. Possibly the UPS woke and tried its best. We nodded to that and made our notes. We photographed the panel, the UPS before and after, the little 7-seg grinning at us with its 207. We put a yellow tag on the rocker, wrote "Do not re-energize pending city telecom" on it because people like us speak to each other with stickers too. We logged the door latches intact and left the place neater than we found it, because that's a small respect you pay to rooms that once did their jobs. There was one more door to check. The lower level had a steel hatch I hadn't liked the look of when my torch first found it. It had a hand wheel and a sign that said, "Refuge Chamber. Maintenance only." I put my palm on the metal. Cold. No vibration. No airflow. And Alovu and I exchanged the glance that says, "We will be happier later if we can say we checked." We spun the wheel and lifted. The hatch opened with the complaint of 2 decades. Inside, a small, clean room waited, the kind designed to keep people alive long enough to matter. Benches. A rack with oxygen cylinders that had long surrendered pressure. A landline socket with a cord coiled neatly beside it. On the wall, a laminated card with instructions for calling mind control and, if no answer, 10111. Someone had underlined that last bit with a pen that had bled in humidity. On the bench, there was a logbook. Pages filled in with dates when someone had dutifully come to check that Hope still had a place to sit. The last entry was 3 years earlier. Chamber inspected. Comms box pending relocation. Emergency phone programmed to auto-dial on power fail. A signature that was a first name only, and a number we didn't need. I took a photo for the file, and Delovu, practical as always, flipped the landline plug with his fingertip. It wasn't plugged into anything. It had never been, or it had been once, and then not. When we sealed the hatch, the night had shifted in one of those small ways only night knows to do. Outside, a wind had started to test itself against the bush. A train far off called its horn twice, and someone's dog a kilometer away answered like it was participating. We walked out with Themba behind us, his torch creating that tunnel everyone follows when they don't want to think too hard about what's outside the tunnel. At the door, he stopped. "I have to tell you something," he said, not making it more than that. "At the start of load shedding tonight, our radio picked up our own callback tone, not the security company's, the old mind control tone. It's not been in our radios for years. It called, then it stopped." "You logged it?" I asked, because that's how I carry things without them carrying me. "Yeah," he said. "I wrote it down so it happened on paper and not just in my head." Control sent a city telecoms tech at first light. He arrived with a head torch and a toolkit heavier than I wanted to carry, and that cheerful competence people bring to work that is mostly weather and the same problem in different clothes. He found what we had, and more. A corrosion path on a line card that let the UPS feed wake up the auto dialer when the battery dipped and recovered. A number retained in a programmable module that should have been cleared. A relay that liked the rhythm it had made for itself so much, it did it all night. He wrote a report with the words, "legacy system," and intermittent seizure, and recommended decommissioning the whole cabinet in favor of a padlock and a sign. He stuck 2 silica gel bags in the box like a benediction. That is the practical part. It's the part I like telling because it seals the edges. But if you asked me in the canteen the next day why I looked past your shoulder when you said my name the first time, I'd mention the other bit, the one my form doesn't have a field for. On the way back to the boom, where Themba's little office had a kettle that had survived more power cycles than any of us, my radio, our normal SAPS channel, gave a quick double click of someone keying and not speaking. It happens. Wind, finger slip, an earpiece on a collar. But what followed wasn't the usual silence. It was a thin slice of audio. Station to Alpha 16. Copy a 10111 silent, cut off, then our own Alpha 16 copy, but thinner, like it had been played back by a device that had forgotten how loud it wanted to be. Ndlovu looked at me. I looked at him. We both didn't smile. "We have learned you don't bully knights into giving you their best idea of themselves." "Control," I said, "because you always let someone else hold a piece of it." "We've got a brief loop of our first traffic on air, likely multipath or bleed from the mine system." "Copy," she said. "Our side is clean. Telecom's notes induction is possible if you were near a live cable run. Thank you for the diligence. Job marked closed pending decommission." They pulled the cabinet a week later. The report landed in our system with a reference that, to anyone else, would look like a small piece of admin best left in a folder until someone needs to quote a number at a meeting. Themba said the tone at the gate stopped. The pump house sat with its door locked, and the sun went about burning the smell out of the room during the day and putting a different one in at night. 2 nights after, Control keyed us, while we were parked by a township tuck shop tasting the hot oil air that comes through when you're hungry and not allowed to be. "For your information, 161. Second open 10111. Mapped briefly to Kamadi Gate 2. No audio. Cleared immediately. Possibly the system saying goodbye. No action required." I said copy, and drank the rest of my coffee before it decided to stop being coffee. If I have to put fear anywhere, I put it in small boxes. Not because I'm brave, because I have to sleep. What I can tell you is this. The quietest calls walk you into rooms where machines remember. They hold on to a job long after people tell them they've earned their rest. A UPS chirps its little note into a darkness it thinks is full of people who need it. A relay finds a rhythm it likes and calls the world with it. A handset sits on a cradle yellowed by years and waits for a hand that isn't coming and still promises, in a way plastic can, to take a voice wherever it has to go. 2:07. I don't mind that it's stuck there. Times mean less at that hour. But sometimes, when we roll through that valley under a sky that's big enough to make you believe you're smaller than your own worry, I think about numbers that don't climb and lines that don't drop, and the way control says, copy, in a voice that puts a rung under your foot. The mine is quiet now. The siren towers are mostly decorations for crows. The pump house hums some nights just because water knows how to be. And if you ask me whether that old phone tried to call us, I'll tell you yes, in the plainest way. It did exactly what it was made for, it asked. We answered.